I never imagined my own daughter would leave me out in the cold. Not metaphorically but literally. I never thought the man she married would humiliate me at my lowest point, and worse that she'd just stand by and let it happen. But what neither of them knew was that life hadn't played its last hand. And when I finally did, everything turned. So settle in, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. I'd love to know where you're listening from, and if this touches you, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like it. My name's Carol Foster. I'm 58 years old, and until recently I truly believed in something called unconditional love, especially when it came to family. I built my entire world around my husband and our daughter Lauren. Every meal I cooked, every holiday I planned, every dollar I put aside, all of it was for them. When my husband died of cancer last year, it felt like the floor dropped out from under me. But I kept telling myself, at least I still have Lauren. I still have my daughter. I ended up selling the house my husband and I had built together from the ground up in Lakewood, Colorado, just outside of Denver. The memories were too much, and waking up every night half expecting to hear his voice calling from the kitchen. It was unbearable. Lauren and her husband Brian Whitaker said I could stay with them for a little while. Well, Lauren did. Brian didn't even look up from his phone the day I moved in. I tried hard not to be a burden. I kept to a small room in the back, helped out however I could, cooking, cleaning, offering to run errands. Just trying to be useful, trying not to step on toes. But Brian had this way of looking at me that made it clear I wasn't welcome. There was always this tension in his eyes, like I was some splinter he couldn't get rid of. At first it was small things. Rolling his eyes if I asked something, flipping the channel when I was halfway through a show. One time as he walked past me in the hallway, I could have sworn I heard him mutter "freeloader" under his breath. I tried to tell myself I misheard, but deep down I knew I hadn't. Lauren never said a word. I'd glance at her, waiting for her to step in to say anything, but she always brushed it off. "He's just stressed," she'd say. "Work's been tough." So I stayed quiet. Swallowed the shame. That's what moms do, right? But then came that night. The night that broke something in me. We were sitting at the dinner table. I'd made chicken pot pie, his favorite. Lauren was half scrolling on her phone, Brian sipping beer like always. The silence was heavy. Then out of nowhere Brian looked up and said, "Maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary. We're not running a charity." Lauren froze. I stared at him, stunned. "What are you saying?" I asked. He gave me this smug little smirk. "I'm saying, how long is this supposed to go on? You're not working. You're not paying for anything. We've got bills. We didn't agree to support someone else." I could feel my heart race, my breath catching in my throat. I turned to Lauren, searching her face for something, anything. But she couldn't even look at me. "Maybe it's better," she mumbled, "if you found something more stable. For everyone's sake." Everyone's sake. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I stood up, walked to my room and packed my things. 2 suitcases. That was all that was left of my life. I didn't shed a single tear until I was standing outside their apartment building, the wind cutting through my coat, realizing I had nowhere else to go. Lauren didn't walk me out. Brian didn't even pretend to care. I sat on the curb for an hour. My phone was dead. My heart felt even deader. And I remember thinking, so this is what it feels like, to be erased. That night I found a cheap motel, the kind where the wallpaper peels and the vending machine eats your quarters. I lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, wondering how it had come to this, wondering what I'd done to deserve this kind of abandonment. The next morning I texted Lauren. "I understand. I love you always." No reply. A week passed. I sent another message. Then another. I wished her a happy birthday. Sent little updates. Nothing. 3 months went by, each one slower than the last. I applied for jobs, anything I could find. But nobody was eager to hire a grieving 58-year-old woman with no recent work history. I thought about cleaning houses, babysitting, but my body didn't move the way it used to. The loneliness was crushing. But worse than the loneliness was the shame. I had given everything to that girl. How could she turn away so easily? One evening, desperate for something familiar, I opened a box of old keepsakes from our family. I needed to feel connected to something. Anything. And that's when I found it. It was my mother's old diary. I don't think I'd ever really read it, maybe glanced at it once years ago, but that night something about it called to me. I sat down on the edge of the motel bed, opened the cover and flipped through a few yellowed pages. And then I saw it. A name. A secret that would change everything. I remember the moment so vividly. My hands trembled. My heart thundered. Because right then I wasn't just the mother who got pushed out. I was someone else entirely. And for the first time in months I smiled. They had taken everything from me, but they had no idea what was coming. After that night, the days started bleeding together like gray watercolors soaking through a wet canvas. The motel room always smelled like stale air and old cigarettes. Outside my door, the soft buzzing of the vending machine became this strange, pathetic lullaby. I kept mostly to myself. I didn't cry every night, but when I did, it was the kind of crying where your whole body shakes but no sound comes out because you already know. No one's coming. On the fourth day I texted Lauren again. Just something simple. I'm okay. Just wondering how you are. She never answered. 2 weeks later I tried again. Just a heart emoji. Still nothing. I kept telling myself she was just overwhelmed. Maybe Brian was twisting things, making it worse. But as the days dragged on, that small flicker of hope inside me started to rot. My money was thinning out fast. I started applying for anything, grocery stores, front desk work, even a rundown diner off the highway, but I kept hearing the same polite rejection. Too experienced. Not quite the right fit. We all know what that means. Too old. Too tired. One night I sat cross-legged on the motel floor, going through the only box I'd brought that wasn't filled with clothes. It was my memory box from the house. A handful of old photos, some faded letters. And at the very bottom a small leather-bound book. My mother's diary. I don't even remember packing it. I almost shoved it back in, but something about the way the leather felt in my hands made me pause. I turned on the lamp by the bed, sat quietly and opened the first page. Her handwriting was exactly as I remembered it, looping and careful, just like the notes she used to leave in my lunchbox when I was a kid. At first it was all ordinary stuff. Weather, church updates, complaints about grocery prices. But then I got to an entry dated June. He came again today. Said he wished things were different. That he wished I could be his wife. But he has a name to protect. A family. A business. Carol must never know. I just pray that one day she understands how much I loved her. Even if she was born from a mistake. And desire. I froze. I read that line again. Then again. He must never know. My breath caught. My chest tightened. I kept flipping through the diary, my fingers trembling. There were more entries. Little clues, moments, quiet hotel meetings, small envelopes of money she tried to refuse but couldn't afford to. She never wrote his full name, only the initials, H's. And then in an entry dated February she wrote, he told me he made arrangements. That if anything ever happened to him he'd make sure Carol got something. A piece of what he built. It wouldn't be official, it was too dangerous, but he promised me a trust. A letter. He said his lawyer Mr. Halperin would know what to do. That name Halperin hit me like a punch. I knew I'd seen it somewhere before. It took 2 days and several hours at the motel's painfully slow public computer, but I finally found him. Samuel Halperin, retired estate attorney, still listed under a private firm in Tucson. I couldn't call. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. So I wrote him a letter. A real one. Pen on paper. I explained who I was. Who my mother was. And asked, begged for a conversation. 2 weeks later I got the call. I remember the way his voice cracked when I said my mother's name. He knew her. Not just professionally. Personally. I always wondered if you'd reach out one day, he said. There's something you need to see. The next morning I packed a small bag and took a Greyhound to Tucson. I didn't know what to expect. I half believed it might be a scam. But the moment I walked into that quiet office, lined with law books full of old silence, I knew it was real. He handed me a sealed envelope. The paper was fragile, faded. On the front, written in blue ink, to my daughter Carol Louise. My hands shook. The letter was from Harold James Sterling, the founder of Sterling Energy, one of the biggest oil companies in the Southwest. A man I'd grown up seeing in newspapers and magazine clippings. A man with a powerful family. A pristine reputation. A legacy. I couldn't even get through the letter in one read. I cried halfway through the second paragraph. He admitted it all. The affair, the guilt, the love he never had the courage to name, and then the promise. In the event of my death, I have arranged for a portion of my personal wealth, kept entirely separate from my official estate, to be delivered to you through Mr. Halperin. You're my daughter. And though I was too much of a coward to claim you in life, I claim you now in death." Then Mr. Halperin slid a folder across the desk. Inside were bank account numbers, investment portfolios, property deeds, title documents. Everything was clean, legal, legitimate. The total value? Just over $1 million. I stared at the stack of papers, then looked up at him. "This is real," I whispered. He nodded gently. "It's yours. Always has been." My heart pounded, not from the money but because for the first time in my life I felt like I was chosen. Like I was finally seen. I didn't cry, didn't laugh, didn't collapse. I just sat there in silence, letting the truth wash over me like a long-awaited rain after years of drought. That night, back in my motel room, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling the same way I had for months. Only this time, there was a faint smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. They thought they had thrown me away. That I was finished. But they had no idea. I wasn't broken. I was only just getting started. I didn't return to Denver right away. Something inside me had shifted for good. I wasn't just Carol Foster, the forgotten mother who got pushed aside. I was someone new now. Someone who'd lived through decades of lies and had finally uncovered the truth. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I wasn't suffocating under shame. I was breathing in something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. I stayed in Tucson for a few more days. I wandered through quiet neighborhoods, sipped coffee at corner cafes, watched people living their lives, people who hadn't been discarded. And for once I didn't envy them. I studied them. I wondered who among them wore forced smiles, who had been betrayed, who had clawed their way back from feeling invisible. Mr. Halperin didn't just give me an inheritance, he gave me time. Time to process, time to sit with the truth. Time to understand what this really meant. Because what I held in my hands wasn't just wealth. It was power. And I had no idea what to do with it yet. But grief? Grief can turn into fuel once you've been humiliated enough times. When I finally returned to Denver, I didn't go back to that grim little motel. I booked a short-term rental downtown, clean, modern, tucked just off a quiet stretch of South Broadway. It was the kind of place Lauren and Brian would never imagine me affording. I began dressing differently. Nothing flashy, just sharp, intentional, neutral. The kind of invisible that slips through doors unnoticed. I started teaching myself business basics. Watching YouTube videos on real estate, contracts, investing. I wasn't trying to build an empire. I just wanted to make sure no one could ever make me feel powerless again. That's when I found it. A buried listing on a quiet real estate auction site. A small apartment complex in East Denver. It looked a little rundown, sure, but it was structurally sound. And then I saw the address. It was their building. The exact one where Lauren and Brian lived. The same place where they kicked me out with nothing but 2 suitcases and an empty apology. My hands started to shake. The property was listed as distressed. The owner had defaulted on the taxes. Auction in 2 weeks. I didn't hesitate. With Mr. Halperin's help, I formed an LC. Just a quiet little shell company, nothing traceable. I filed the paperwork, transferred the funds, and placed the bid. I wasn't trying to take revenge. Not exactly. I just wanted to reclaim control over the one place they thought they owned. The auction came and went. I won. Quietly. Wiggly. Completely under the radar. And just like that, I owned the building where they lived. The same building where I was told I was a burden. The same kitchen where Brian accused me of freeloading. I remember sitting at my desk, holding the signed deed, whispering to myself, "Let's see how Brian likes paying rent to the mouth he couldn't feed." A month later, I had the notification letters mailed out. All tenants were informed of lease reassessments. New market rates. Updated terms. For Brian and Lauren, that meant triple the amount they had been paying. Not double, triple. Market rate plus months of deferred payments. I didn't need to be there to witness the explosion. I could feel Brian's fury from miles away. But this wasn't about the money. It was about pride. Brian Whitaker needed control the way some people need oxygen. And in one move, I had taken it away without saying a word. 2 days later, Lauren called me. It was the first time I'd heard from her since the night I left. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. "Mom, I don't know if you've heard, but something weird's going on. Our rent just went up. Like a lot. Brian's freaking out. I don't know. Can we talk?" I didn't reply. Because this wasn't vengeance. It was gravity. And sometimes, The weight of a choice is the only way someone feels its impact. A week after the notices went out, I drove by the complex late one night. The lights were on in their unit. I could see shadows behind the curtains. Lauren pacing. Brian yelling, his silhouette unmistakable. I sat there for a while just watching. Then I drove away. I felt hollow. I felt vindicated. And I still hurt like hell. Because no matter what I now knew, no matter what I owned, I would have given anything to be invited back in. Not to their apartment but to my daughter's heart. But I knew that wasn't going to happen. Not yet. So I stayed quiet. I waited. Because sometimes, the loudest justice is the one that doesn't say a word. And I wasn't finished yet. I didn't realize just how much I had changed until I saw Lauren at the grocery store 3 weeks after the rent hike. She didn't see me. I was 2 aisles over, hidden behind a rack of discounted cereal. He looked exhausted, not just tired but drained. Her hair was pulled back in that messy way she always wore when she'd been crying. Her cart was half empty. Mostly cheap staples, eggs, rice, a few generic canned goods. I should have walked away. But I didn't. I followed her from a distance, my heart pounding like I was doing something wrong. She stopped in front of a small box of mac and cheese, stared at it, then glanced at her phone. Probably a text from Brian. Her shoulders slumped. He put the box back. That moment shattered me. Not because I pitied her, but because I remembered the little girl who used to run to me crying with scraped knees. The one who asked me every night to check under her bed for monsters. And now she was living with one. I went home that day and sat on the couch, staring at the window in silence for hours. Thinking about how life, piece by piece, had twisted us into strangers. But I kept reminding myself, this wasn't punishment. It was consequence. And that consequence had been waiting a long time. I had plans now. It wasn't just about the building. It was a slow, quiet chess match. Every move was intentional. Every step thought through. With the LLC finalized and the title legally transferred, I started making repairs. Small ones at first. Fixing leaks, replacing broken locks, dealing with flickering hallway lights. Brian never noticed. He was too busy storming at the property manager over email, demanding answers about the rent increase. But I knew him. I knew how his ego worked. Moving out would feel like defeat, and he wasn't the type to accept that. And Lauren? She'd always follow his lead. So I kept going. I had the building signage replaced, added a security camera near the lobby, updated the mailboxes. All under the name ML Holdings. Margaret Louise. My initials. No one knew who was behind the company. Then came the annual inspection notice. Mandatory. Brian fired back through the tenant portal, furious and dramatic, full of empty threats and righteous outrage. I smiled reading it. He was unraveling, and I hadn't even lifted a finger. Meanwhile, I was becoming someone I barely recognized. I wore my hair differently now, tied back sharp and clean. My clothes were tailored, neutral, calculated. I started attending small business meetups under a pseudonym, quietly absorbing how real estate worked, how people in that world talked and moved. No one asked about my past. They just saw a quiet, poised woman with sharp eyes and cash in hand. The best disguise is the truth you choose not to speak. One morning, I walked past Lauren and Brian in the parking lot after a tenant meeting. I kept my sunglasses on, hair tucked into a sleek bun, documents in one hand. Lauren barely glanced at me. Brian didn't recognize me at all. Later that evening, I sat in my apartment with a cup of tea, thinking about how surreal it felt to pass your own child without being seen. Not because you're small, but because you've grown too big for their memory. They couldn't recognize me now. They only knew the version of me they used to control. And that woman was gone. The calls from Lauren kept coming. Gentle voicemails, uncertain and soft. "Hi, Mom. Just wondering if maybe you had time to talk. I know things have been complicated." I didn't return them. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed her to feel the silence she created. And whenever doubt crept in, I opened my mother's diary. I'd read the words again and again. Carol must never know. He must never know. But I did know now. And that knowledge, it was armor. No one could pierce it. I wasn't the woman begging for shelter anymore. I was the woman who owned the roof. I always believed revenge wasn't about getting even. It was about restoring balance. Justice without rage. A correction, not a war. But when I saw the email Brian sent in response to the rent hike, I won't lie, a small spark of satisfaction lit up inside me. This is absolutely unacceptable. This has to be a mistake. Tripling our rent? That's extortion. I demand to speak with whoever owns this dump. We've lived here 3 years and never missed a payment. This is robbery. He signed it, Brian D. Whitaker, like his name meant something. I read it 3 times, then forwarded it to the property manager with a short note. Please reply with standard clause C regarding market rate adjustments. No special exceptions. He wasn't just angry, he was stunned. His ego had never prepared him for someone outplaying him. He lived in control. Answering to a faceless landlord? That was unbearable. Lauren called again that night. The message was different. No excuses. Just raw. Mom, I know you're not picking up, but I really need to talk to you. Things are bad. Brian is angry all the time. It's been rough. I miss you. I really do. Her voice cracked at the end. And for a second I hovered over the screen. I could have called her back. Told her it was going to be okay. Offered to fix it like I always used to. But I didn't. Because it wasn't okay. And I couldn't keep patching holes in a boat she helped sink. She let him throw me out like I was just another bill they couldn't pay. And now, with the weight falling on her shoulders, she remembered how to dial my number? No. Let her sit with the silence a while longer. The next week I approved more upgrades to the building. Fresh exterior paint, new hallway lights, landscaping out front. Brian's rent wasn't just a consequence. It was funding better living conditions for the other tenants. That was the irony. Everyone else benefited. He just couldn't see past his own resentment. He started leaving handwritten notes under the office door, full of sarcasm and petty complaints. The water pressure sucks. Trash is piling up. If this is what we're paying for, it's a joke. Every note went unanswered. Lauren stopped calling. She started texting instead. Short clipped messages. Hey, can we talk? I really need you. Then silence. Okay. Meanwhile, I watched the ML Holdings bank account grow. The building was stable. Profitable even. The other tenants were kind, responsible. They paid on time. No drama. It was only Brian making noise and Lauren caught in the storm behind him. But everything shifted when I received the quarterly report from the property manager. Attached were recent photos from inside their unit. Cracked kitchen tiles, mildew in the bathroom, a pile of unopened mail on the floor. They were slipping. Cutting corners. Living lean. I should have felt sympathy. But what I felt was clarity. This was never just about rent. It was about power. And Brian was losing his fast. Word around the complex was that he'd taken on extra shifts at work. Someone saw Lauren crying on the back stairwell one afternoon. They were unraveling from the inside out, and I hadn't said a single word. That's what I kept coming back to. For so long I had begged to be heard. Begged Lauren to see who he was, to see who she was becoming by staying beside him. Now they were choking on their own silence and I was watching from above. Literally. My new apartment overlooked their courtyard. Different building. Higher floor. Better neighborhood. A view they could never afford. I didn't watch them constantly. Just enough. Enough to remember I wasn't crazy. That I didn't imagine what they did to me. That their betrayal deserved consequence. And yet, even with all that, some nights I still found myself sitting by the window holding my phone staring at Lauren's last message. I really need you. The words echoed in my mind. The part of me that was still a mother ached to respond. But the woman I'd become, she knew better. She knew this was only the beginning. I used to think heartbreak came with slammed doors and raised voices, big dramatic scenes, the kind people talk about later. But real heartbreak, it's quiet. It slips in through a voicemail you don't return. A message you leave unread. It's in the silence between you and someone who once called you mommy. The calls from Lauren stopped eventually. The text slowed. But from what I heard through building staff, the damage behind that apartment door only grew. The tension between her and Brian had turned into open hostility. He was snapping at everyone, refusing maintenance visits, demanding pointless inspections, always looking for someone else to blame. And Lauren? I was told she looked like she hadn't slept in days. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. This wasn't about watching them suffer. It was something far harder, watching your own daughter stay in a cage and call it love. One afternoon, my property manager sent me a report following a noise complaint. The neighbor downstairs had heard shouting, something about losing control and, "This is all your fault." Brian stormed out and didn't return until the next morning. Lauren stayed inside, lights off, curtains drawn the entire night. I waited. Not for him. For her. Took 2 long days. Then just as the sun dipped behind the trees one evening, the building's intercom buzzed. Her voice hesitant and broken. Hi, this is Lauren Whitaker. I was wondering if Carol, my mom, lives here. My heart stopped. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the screen, frozen. Then slowly I pressed the door release. 10 minutes later, a quiet knock came at my door. When I opened it, there she stood, not the girl I raised, but a shadow of her. Pale skin. Makeup smudged. Wrinkled blouse. She looked 20 years older than she was. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. Neither of us spoke. Then finally she let out a breath. Hi, Mom. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed. The only sound in the room was the gentle clinking of teacups as I made us both a mug. I didn't ask why she'd come. I didn't ask how she was. I just handed her the cup, sat across from her and waited. I don't know where to start, she whispered. I said nothing. He's not easy. He's angry all the time. Blames the rent. Blames me. Blames the neighbor's dog, for God's sake. So I stayed quiet. I thought I was doing the right thing, she said. Back when we asked you to leave. She winced. Asked like you had a choice. I just wanted to keep the peace. Brian said, he said you'd never leave unless we pushed you. She looked down. And I hate myself for agreeing. I took a sip of tea. I miss you, she whispered. But I don't know how to fix it. I studied her face. Every twitch, every crease. She was searching for forgiveness, but too afraid to ask. So I gave her what I could. Silence. Because sometimes silence is safer than the truth. We sat there for nearly an hour. She didn't ask for money. Didn't ask for help. She just needed to be near me. And I let her. When she finally stood to leave, she reached for my hand. I'm sorry, she said. For everything. I didn't say it back. I just held her hand a little longer than she expected. She pulled away first. Then with eyes full of tears she walked out the door. I didn't cry. But the moment the door clicked shut, I sank into my chair, holding the warmth of her teacup in my palms like a lifeline. She had come. She had looked me in the eye. And now I knew, the cracks were finally beginning to show. The thing about power, real power, is that you don't need to raise your voice to use it. You don't need to slam doors or shout threats. You just pull a string here, close a door there, and the people who underestimated you start to squirm. And Brian? He was squirming. After Lauren's visit, things grew darker in their apartment. I didn't need cameras to tell me. You can feel a house unraveling if you listen closely enough. My maintenance team said Brian had become unhinged, storming into the management office twice a week, demanding to know who owned the building. He wanted names. He wanted a face. He wanted someone to blame. Not having one, that made him spiral. I knew he'd start digging. Brian wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat quietly. I'd seen the way he used to scan Lauren's phone when she took too long at the store. How he checked her receipts. Questioned how long errands took. Possessive didn't even begin to describe it. So when he started poking around for the name behind ML Holdings, I was ready. He started with the basics, tried looking up the LLC. But my attorney had filed everything through a privacy trust. No names. No leads. Then came the sloppy emails to my property manager, pretending to be a tenant, asking who owned the building. Pathetic. He even called the title office, pretending to be a lawyer representing another property. The clerk flagged it and called us directly. And when every route failed, he turned inward. I don't know exactly what happened, but one of the tenants called the office and asked if someone could please check on the Whitakers. She said she heard glass shatter, voices raised, that particular kind of rage that doesn't come from unpaid bills. It comes from fear. The maintenance guy went upstairs. No one answered the door, but he could hear Brian pacing, muttering under his breath. And Lauren crying. After that, the silence was heavier than the yelling. A few days later, I received a strange envelope. No return address. No name. Just a folded note inside. I know what you're doing. You think you're clever, but you don't scare me. I'll find out who you are, and when I do, you'll regret it. No signature. But I didn't need one. The handwriting was his. Brian always pressed too hard on the paper, jagged, angry strokes like his words were fists. I sat with the letter in my hands, not afraid, just remembering. It took me right back to that night in the kitchen when he looked me in the eye like I was nothing and Lauren stood beside him. Not confused. Not hesitant. Just silent, complicit. And now he was the one pacing in the dark, screaming into the void, chasing ghosts he couldn't name. It was poetic. But it was also dangerous. So I doubled down. I had my lawyer reach out to building security. We installed additional surveillance. Nothing invasive, just discreet, legal, professional. I made sure every tenant in that building was safe. Because the place wasn't going to fall apart just because one man couldn't handle the weight of his own cruelty. As for Lauren, she didn't call again. But the manager told me she'd been walking to work. Her car was gone, sold probably. Their utilities were being cut. Lights out by 8 p.m., no heat on some nights. The cracks weren't just in their marriage anymore. They were in their survival. And still I kept my distance. This wasn't revenge. It was resolution. I was letting Brian's world shrink until he finally saw how small he really was. And letting Lauren decide. Would she stay locked in that cage, or find the key I had quietly left in front of her? I knew she wasn't ready. Not yet. But walls have a way of closing in. And secrets always find the cracks. I wasn't expecting the knock that night. It had been quiet for days. No calls. No messages. Not even one of Brian's threats. Just stillness. That kind of silence that settles around you like the weight before a storm. But then, soft, slow knocking at my door. Something in my chest tightened. I opened it and there she was. Lauren standing in the rain. Soaked, shivering, holding a grocery bag like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes were bloodshot, her mouth parted, but no words came. It looked like she'd run out of language days ago. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, dripping onto the hardwood floor. I handed her a towel without speaking. We moved like dancers who'd rehearsed a routine in a dream. Quiet, instinctive. I put the kettle on, poured 2 mugs of chamomile. She sat on the edge of the couch, stiff like she didn't think she was allowed to stay. And maybe she wasn't. She stared down into her cup, eyes vacant. Finally, her voice barely audible. "He's not who I thought he was." I didn't respond. Part of me always knew. But I told myself it was stress. That he just needed time. That if I stayed patient, he'd soften. I stayed silent. She looked up, her voice beginning to crack. "He's obsessed. Thinks someone's targeting us. He's been reading through my phone, my emails. Last week, he followed me to work." A shiver passed through her, and not from the cold. "He asked me if I was hiding something. If you were hiding something." That caught in my throat. She didn't wait for me to answer. "I told him I hadn't spoken to you in weeks. That I didn't know where you were." She paused, then admitted, "But that wasn't true. I figured it out. I found your building listed on a maintenance bulletin. Same management company. I put it together." Of course she had. Lauren was smart. Always had been. But smart doesn't always mean brave. And right now she looked like someone who'd opened her eyes and hated what she saw. "I didn't say anything," I said quietly. "Not yet," she whispered. "I miss you. But I don't even know how to be around you anymore." My fingers tightened around the mug. "You left," she said, her voice breaking. "And I let you. I let him push you out." I finally looked at her. "No, Lauren. You didn't just let him. You stood with him." She froze. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, to defend herself. But there was nothing left to defend. I stood up, walked to the window, stared out into the wet night. "That night I begged for your voice. Just one word. One." Behind me I heard her exhale, a small hollow sound. "I didn't think it would get this bad," she said. "I thought I could manage him." "You don't manage a man like that," I said. "You survive him. Or you leave him." She didn't answer. He didn't need to. We sat in silence. 2 women tied by blood but no longer by trust. Not yet. Maybe never. When she finally stood to leave, she placed the mug down gently. Her eyes were ringed with tears that hadn't yet fallen. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. I needed to remember what it feels like to be safe." I walked her to the door. She hesitated, then suddenly turned and wrapped her arms around me. I didn't return the hug at first. Then I did. Slowly. Carefully. Like someone trying to hold on to a memory without letting it slip away. When she pulled back, she didn't say goodbye. And I didn't either. She looked at me one last time before she turned and left. And as the door closed behind her, I felt something shift deep inside my chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the smallest flicker of something that maybe one day could grow into it. She let it. The invitation went out that Tuesday morning. Quiet, formal, no fanfare. A tenants' meeting to discuss upcoming renovations, scheduled for the following week in the common room. Mandatory attendance. Questions welcome. I knew Brian would show. I knew he wouldn't be able to resist. He wanted a name, a face, someone to blame. What he didn't know was that he'd be walking right into the hands of the woman he once discarded like a broken appliance. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early. I wore a charcoal gray blazer, dark jeans. Simple, elegant, nothing flashy. My hair, now in soft waves, brushed past my shoulders. I looked nothing like the woman who had once sat at their kitchen table, begging for a shred of dignity. The room began to fill. Tenants came in, some curious, some irritated, most indifferent. And then Brian stormed in. Same old swagger, expecting confrontation. Lauren followed a few paces behind, small and quiet, her eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't look around. Didn't see me. He went straight for the property manager. "Where is she?" he snapped. "I want to speak to whoever's in charge." The manager stayed calm. "All questions will be addressed during the presentation." Brian scoffed. Lauren looked down at her shoes. I sat in the back row. Silent. The presentation began. Standard updates. Security improvements, landscaping, upgraded insulation timelines. All practical, all necessary. All funded in part by the very rent Brian had spent months protesting. Then the manager paused. "We'd like to thank ML Holdings for their ongoing commitment to revitalizing this property and prioritizing tenant comfort. The owner is here today. If anyone has questions." I stood. The room turned. I walked slowly toward the front, calm, grounded, each step steady like a slow drumbeat in my chest. Brian's face shifted, confusion first, then disbelief. Lauren's lips parted, stunned. "Good evening," I said. "My name is Carol. I'm the owner of this building." You could hear a pin drop. Brian shot to his feet so fast his chair scraped the floor. "You," he spat. "This is a joke. What kind of twisted game is this?" I looked at him, really looked, and I saw the unraveling in his posture, the sweat on his collar, the panic in his eyes. "No game," I said gently. "Just business." He stepped closer. "You've been behind this the whole time. You raised our rent. You're trying to ruin us." I didn't flinch. "I gave you a roof. I made improvements. I treated every tenant fairly. What I didn't do was forget." He opened his mouth to argue again, but I turned to the group. "If anyone has questions about the changes, I'll be happy to answer them after the meeting." "Thank you." I stepped to the side. The meeting went on. But the tension never left the room. Brian didn't sit. He stood trembling with rage, fists clenched. Lauren sat still, her hands locked tightly in her lap, her eyes glassy with tears. When the meeting ended, tenants came up to me, shaking hands, asking questions, thanking me. Some had suspected. Most had no idea. Brian waited until the room was nearly empty before storming over. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "This is nothing. You've made an enemy." I met his stare, unwavering. "No, Brian. I didn't make anything. You did, the day you looked me in the eye and treated me like I didn't matter." Lauren stepped between us. "Brian, stop." He blinked, stunned. "What did you?" I said stop, she said louder, her voice steady. "She's not your enemy. She never was. You are." The words hit him like a slap. And in a way they were. She turned to me, voice trembling. "I didn't know. About the building. About the money. Any of it." I nodded. "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you needed to see it. Not just hear it." She blinked back, tears. Brian scoffed, backing away. "You two deserve each other." "No," I said softly. "She deserves better." And then I turned and walked away. For the first time since that awful night in their kitchen, I didn't feel shame or anger. I felt power. Quiet, steady mine. 4 days later, Lauren knocked on my door again. But this time, she was holding something that made my knees buckle. A book. Worn leather cover, spine frayed, corner torn. My mother's diary. I opened the door without a word. She stepped in, clutching it like something sacred. I found it in my closet, she said. Last time I visited, you must have left it behind. She placed it on the coffee table gently, reverently. I read it, she said. My breath caught. I wasn't trying to pry, she added quickly. I recognized her handwriting. I was looking for something that made sense. Silence settled between us. I didn't know about Harold Sterling, she whispered. Or the trust. Or any of it. I nodded slowly. I didn't either. Not until I had nothing left to lose. Her voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe you were helpless? I looked her in the eye. And for the first time she didn't look away. Because I was helpless. That night you closed the door on me. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have money. I didn't even have a place to cry without someone banging on the wall. Lauren winced. I found that diary when I was at my lowest. Counting coins for dinner. I hadn't spoken to anyone in days. That diary, it didn't just tell me who I was. It reminded me that I mattered. That my mother didn't just love me, she fought for me. Silently. From the shadows. She sat down, hands trembling in her lap. I don't know how I became the kind of daughter who did what I did, she said. I ask myself that every day. I walked to the window looking out at the quiet street. You didn't become her all at once, I said. It happened in small choices. Letting things slide. Choosing peace over truth. Believing love means loyalty, even when it hurts. She stood and walked toward me. I've left him. The words hit like a thunderclap. He tried to go through my laptop again. My bag. I told him no. He screamed. Packed a bag. Said he'd be back. I changed the locks the next morning. I turned to face her. I don't know who I am without him, she said. But I'd rather figure that out than keep disappearing. A silence hung between us. Thick, complicated, unfinished. She looked down at the diary. You didn't deserve what I did. What we did. I can't undo it. But I want to try. I stepped closer. Sat beside her. I used to dream about hearing those words, I said. But now, they don't fix the past. They rewrite it. She looked at me confused. I took her hand. You see me now, I said. And that changes everything. We sat there together for a long time. Not in tension. Not in grief. Just, in that rare kind of silence that doesn't hurt. It heals. The kind that only shows up after truth has finally spoken and been heard. Before Lauren left that night, she paused at the door. You didn't raise me to be weak, she said softly. I just forgot how strong you were. I gave her a small smile. No, I said. You didn't forget. You just stopped looking. But now, she was seeing everything. Not just who I had become, but who I'd always been. When the email from Brian landed in my inbox, I almost didn't open it. The subject line alone made my stomach turn. We need to talk now. I clicked. Read slowly. His words were sharp, chaotic, clawing for control. I know everything. About the building. The inheritance. Your little secret with Sterling. You think you're clever? That you can ruin my life and walk away smiling? Think again. If you don't undo this, I'll go to the press. Your name. Your mother's affair. Everything. Let's see how your shiny little reputation holds up once people know the kind of family you come from. I stared at the screen in stunned silence. Not in fear but in recognition. He had finally connected the dots. Somehow through Lauren or his own digging he found the truth. But I wasn't shaken. Because I had prepared for this moment since the day I bought the building. I forwarded the email to my attorney. By the next morning, Brian received a cease and desist letter. Attached were records of every threatening message he'd sent to the property office. Copies of the fake legal documents he'd tried to submit under a made-up law firm. Tampered emails traced directly to his IP address. Tenant complaints. Maintenance sabotage logs. Audio clips from public spaces. Rants caught on security mics. We didn't need criminal charges. A civil harassment and defamation suit was enough to send him spiraling. 2 days later, Lauren called me. He's gone, she said, her voice tight. Packed a bag while I was at work. Left a note saying he was being hunted. Said you ruined his life. He ruined his own, I said gently. She went quiet. Then, I'm sorry. For thinking he ever deserved my silence. You were scared, I told her. I've been there. Fear shrinks you. But you don't have to stay small. Brian tried once more to fight back. Vague posts on social media hinting at corruption, betrayal. Never naming names. He couldn't afford to. Not after the second letter from my attorney outlined legal consequences for every word he published. He went silent after that. At least publicly. But I know he'll never forget the day he realized that the woman he'd tossed out, with nothing but 2 suitcases and a tired heart, now held the lease beneath his feet, the deed above his head, and the keys to every door he once slammed in her face. Lauren, though, she was changing. She moved out of the unit within a month. Found a tiny studio near her job. Started therapy. Joined a community art class. She even painted something for me, an abstract piece, a phoenix rising in reds and golds. I hung it above my fireplace. We talk more often now. Not every day, but when we do it's real. Honest. No more pretending. And then one day came the last piece. A letter from Samuel Halperin. Congratulations, Carol. The building is fully transferred. All tenants have signed new leases. The lawsuit against Mr. Whitaker has been resolved in your favor. You are now free to sell, hold, or restructure the property as you see fit. I folded the letter slowly, pressed it to my chest. This was never about revenge. It was about truth. About reclaiming my name, my story, my voice. The next morning I called a realtor. It was time to close that chapter and open the next one. A life I didn't have to survive anymore. One I could live on my own terms. I sold the building in late spring. The final paperwork was signed on a clear, cloudless Tuesday. No ceremony. No press. Just the soft click of a pen, a firm handshake, and the quiet weight of 3 years of grief and silence lifting off my shoulders. The money hit my account the next day. But I didn't celebrate. Instead, I wrote a check. A large one. Half the proceeds went to a local shelter for women and children in crisis. A place I wished I had known about the night I stood alone with 2 suitcases and nowhere to go. I asked them to build a wing in my mother's name, the Ellelaner House. My way of honoring the woman who carried her secret so I could one day discover the truth. And become more than the world expected. The other half. I used it to buy a small house. Nothing extravagant. Just a warm 2-bedroom place on a quiet street in Lakewood, the same neighborhood where I grew up. Oak trees out front. A porch swing. Enough space for healing. For growing tomatoes if I ever felt like trying. The day I moved in, Lauren helped carry boxes. We didn't say much. We didn't have to. After we finished unpacking, she sat beside me on the swing, legs folded under her, eyes drifting down the street like she was trying to recognize the girl she used to be. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to find her again. I remember riding my bike here, Lauren said softly, before everything got complicated. I nodded. You were always safe here. I forgot how that felt, she whispered. We didn't talk about Brian. We didn't need to. His chapter had ended, not with chaos, not with drama, just silence. He vanished into a different city, a different job, probably a different lie. But not before signing the NDA and dropping every last threat. He didn't want another legal fight. More than that, he didn't want the world to see the truth. Now he was just a ghost. Lauren stayed for dinner. We made grilled cheese and tomato soup, like we used to when she was little. She laughed when she burned one side. I laughed when she tried to blame the pan. It was the first real laughter we'd shared in years. That night, after she left, I stood by the window, cradling a warm mug of tea, watching the moonlight stretch across the front lawn. And for the first time in a very long time I said it out loud. I forgive you. Not to Lauren, to myself. Because that was the hardest part. Not surviving. Not rebuilding. Not rising from the ashes. The hardest part was understanding that I was never the fire they tried to extinguish. I was the spark they underestimated. They taught me silence meant weakness. But I learned to wield it. They tried to erase me. But I became someone they could never forget. I sat down on the couch, opened my mother's diary one last time, and tucked a small note inside. Something for Lauren to find someday. You don't need their love to be worthy. You don't need their approval to be strong. You only need the truth. And to never ever forget who you are. The clock ticked softly in the background. My tea had gone cold in my hands. But my heart, it was finally warm. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to win. I just needed to be who I was all along. And now, finally, I was home.